Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's get started and look into our daily quiz. Let's look into the first question. Consider the following statements with respect to PM Divine Scheme. The scheme will fund infrastructure and social development projects in the spirit of PM Gati Shakti in the Naxal affected states. It will not be a substitute for existing central or state schemes. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the PIB makes a reference to the PM Divine Scheme. What does PM Divine stands for? It stands for the Prime Minister's Development Initiative for the Northeast region. Let us try and understand what are these options. When we look into the first option, the scheme will fund infrastructure and social developmental projects in the spirit of PM Gati Shakti in the Naxal affected states. This is a wrong statement. Why? That is because it is not in reference to the red corridor or the Naxal affected states, but instead it is with respect to the northeastern part of India. Since the focus is on the northeastern part of India and not on Naxal affected states, this happens to be a wrong statement. When we look into the PM Divine Scheme, what is this scheme all about? This is an infrastructure developmental scheme. This is in the spirit of PM Gati Shakti, which means we already have a program which is envisaged by the government of India called as the PM Gati Shakti. This is another infrastructural support program where there will be multinodal connectivity programs across the length and breadth of the country. So in line with this, because they are developing infrastructural projects in the PM Gati Shakti on a similar lines, projects will be developed where in the northeastern part of India, where funding will be provided for the infrastructure and the social developmental projects. So the initial allocation would be about 1500 crores, and the basic objective is to enable livelihood activities for youth and women and also filling up the gaps that are existing in the various sectors. What do we mean by it? We have number of programs that are initiated by the states in the northeastern part of India. We also have developmental schemes initiated by the government of India as well. So central government and state governments both have taken up schemes and programs. So with respect to the implementation of this new scheme, PM Divine Scheme, what would happen? Apart from the existing schemes, there will be new schemes added as part of this particular initiative. So this is not a substitute, but instead for the existing programs taken up by the central government and the state governments, new set of infrastructural add-ons will be implemented, which is why the second statement is right and the answer to this would be 2 only. And remember, the PM Divine will be implemented through the Northeastern Council. Now let's look into the next practice question. With respect to endosulfan, which of the following statements are correct? It is a widely banned pesticide with hazardous effects on human genetic and endocrine systems. It is listed by the Stockholm Convention as a persistent organic pollutant and targeted for global elimination. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to the endosulfan case. Let us try and understand what is this endosulfan, what is the issue surrounding this particular article, and what has to be done going forward. When we speak about endosulfan, what is it? It is a pesticide. What does it do? This pesticide is sprayed on number of crops like the cashew, cotton, tea, paddy, fruit, so on and so forth. So basically, this is an insecticide which is used in agriculture. It is also used as a wood preservative. It is primarily sprayed on food crops like tea, fruits, vegetables and grains, basically to prevent the pests from attacking all these crops. It is used against cabbage worms, white flies, leaf hoppers, aphids, colored potato, beetles as well. When we are using this endosulfan for a considerably longer period of time, this also has negative implications as well, and that is directly being impacted on the human health. How? The toxicity of the endosulfan has a lot of issues. Acute endosulfan poisoning causes symptoms like hyperactivity, convulsions, tremors, staggering, lack of coordination, nausea, vomiting, breathing difficulty, diarrhea, and also unconsciousness. So this particular endosulfan, if it is ingested by the human beings, what would happen? There'll be number of health issues, and ultimately this may cause late sexual maturity, physical deformity, poisoning, and ultimately there would be negative health implications on the human beings. And as a result, what does the Supreme Court do? The Supreme Court back in the year 2011 looks into this particular case and ultimately goes on to ban the use of the endosulfan. So this article currently goes on to say that the Supreme Court in the year 2011 went ahead with banning of the endosulfan and also requested the state government of Kerala to provide compensation to those people who have been suffering from this particular issue, but the state of Kerala has not provided the compensation. So the Supreme Court says should contempt action be initiated against the state government of Kerala. And now if you look into the option, the first option says it is widely banned pesticide with hazardous effects on human genetic and endocrine system. This is the right statement. The second statement is also right as it is listed by the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutant, and this is targeted for the global elimination. Apart from this, the endosulfan is also listed by the Rotterdam Convention. Both primarily mean that they have to come up with alternative options. They have to identify new means of destroying the pest, but they have to end the use of the endosulfan. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements with respect to Indian National Army are incorrect? It was formed in 1942 by Subhash Chandra Bose. They had participated in Operation Yugo, the 1944 Japanese campaign towards British India. Which of the statements are incorrect? Since it is asking for the incorrect statement, the answer to this is one only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to the Indian National Army. Let us try and understand what are these options. When we look into the first option, it was formed in 1942 by Subhash Chandra Bose. This happens to be a wrong statement. Why? Because initially it was formed under the leadership of not Subhash Chandra Bose, but instead it was under the leadership of Mohan Singh. So remember, initially when it was formed, it was not under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose, but it was Mohan Singh. But in the second time, it was revived by Subhash Chandra Bose. So the first statement is incorrect. When we look into the second statement, they had participated in Operation Yugo, the 1944 Japanese campaign towards British India. This is the right statement. So when we are speaking about this particular operation, what is this operation? We have the Japanese forces which also wanted to have a control over large areas of Southeast Asia. They also had animosity towards the British Empire as well. So what do? They come up with their army. They also wanted to fight against the British Empire. So one of the operations where the Indian National Army was also included happens to be Operation Yugo. Why did the Indian National Army approve this? They felt that this British Empire had looted India, so they have to be thrown away from India. So in order to throw the British Empire out of India, they also had an association with the Japan forces. So basically we have the Japanese army which are operating in Southeast Asia. They had also captured some of the areas like Singapore. In Singapore, you had the Indian National Army who became the prisoners of war under the Japanese forces, and these people formed the Indian National Army. So the Indian National Army was used by the Japanese forces, and that is what is called as Operation Yugo, where the 1944 Japanese campaign towards British India. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements are incorrect? Article 323A contemplates establishment of tribunals for public service matters only. Article 323B contemplates establishment of tribunals for certain other matters. Tribunals under Article 323A can be established only by Parliament. Tribunals under Article 323B can be established both by Parliament and state legislatures with respect to matters falling within their legislative competence. Under Article 323A, Only one tribunal for the center and one for each state or two or more states may be established. There is no question of hierarchy of tribunals, whereas under Article 323B, a hierarchy of tribunals may be created. Which of the statements are incorrect? Since it is asking for the incorrect statement, the answer to this is none. All the three statements given in this practice question are correct. So the answer to this would be none. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to the tribunals. Now let's look into the next practice question. Among the following, which one is the least water efficient crop? Sugarcane, sunflower, pearl millet, red gram. The answer to this is sugarcane. This happens to be a previous year question from the year 2021. So when we are considering the least water efficient crop, it also means which crop in this particular process utilizes more of water. So we have sugarcane, which is the least water efficient, which means it is using a lot of water, which can be approximately about 1800 to 2200 per season, which is highest amongst all these crops. Now let's look into the fact of the day. The fact of the day for today's discussion is the principle of non-intervention. Let us try and understand what is this principle of non-intervention all about. There are other important principles. One includes the principle of self-defense. There is also another test called as the Caroline test. Let us try and understand all of these principles and the test. First up, what is this principle of non-intervention? As the very name denotes, it is the non-intervention. What do we understand by this? We have number of countries world over. We have number of countries which have their own independent decision making as well. So what we have is something called as the principle of sovereignty, where every country has the territorial integrity, it has a political boundary drawn, it has a system of selecting its representatives, it can be presidential system, it can be the prime ministership, it can be the cabinet form of government. So every system has its own way of selecting representatives as well. These representatives who are elected ultimately form the laws for that particular country. They might also have their own list of domestic affairs as well. They might also have their own internal disturbances as well. So when a country is formed, when they are sovereign itself, when they have a territorial integrity of their own, when they are making decisions on the basis of representational form of the government, it is for that country to decide what it wants to do as part of the internal affairs. But now, if there is some other country interfering on the sovereign front, trying to meddle on the internal affairs, wanting to disturb the peace and tranquility, and want to interfere in the internal affairs of some other country, that means there is the principle of non-intervention which is violated. So what is this principle of non-intervention? You should not be interfering in the internal affairs of some other country. You should not disturb the peace and tranquility of some other country. You do not have the right to interfere on the sovereign aspect, the territorial integrity of a country. And if you are disturbing any of these mental frameworks or the principles, it means the principle of non-intervention is getting violated. So the principle of non-intervention is basically given in the Article 2 or 4 of the United Nations Charter. In the present situation, we have Russia, which has interfered with the affairs of Ukraine, which means it has violated the principle of non-intervention. So in this particular case, any other country should not enforce some of the dictatorial tendencies. They should not be trespassing another country either temporarily or in limited operations, in and out operations. That is what is called as the principle of non-intervention. Followed by this, we have the principle called as aggression. What is the aggression? Basically, whenever there is a country which is making use of its armed forces to disturb the peace and tranquility, sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of some other country, that is what is called as aggression. So in the present situation, what Russia is doing against Ukraine happens to be an example of aggression. Not only this, let's say there is a third country. This third country is allowing the aggressor to use its land for an aggressive stance that can also be treated as aggression. For example, in the present situation, we have Belarus. Belarus happens to be another country. So the fight is between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine. So if Belarus is providing its land for the Russians to make use of Belarus land to foil a war against Ukraine, that is also considered as aggression. So whatever Belarus is doing in the present situation is also considered as aggression. So what is the principle of self-defense? Then we have something called as self-defense, which is clearly given in Article 51, which authorizes a state to resort to individual or collective self-defense. What does this mean? This means if there is another country which is foiling to create a war, disturb the peace and tranquility, the country which is a victim in this particular case has every right to defend itself. In the present situation, we have Russia which has become an aggressor, so Ukraine has every right to defend itself. How does it defend itself? It can also enter into a collective defense treaty, which can also be NATO as well. So now the question is, can Russia make use of the very principle of self-defense in the present situation? This article says no. Why? That is because in this present situation, the self-defense cannot be used by Russia. Why? That is because Ukraine has not been an aggressor. Russia has been an aggressor. Russia now goes on to say that Ukraine in the near future may acquire the nuclear missiles as well. According to one of the landmark judgments given by the International Court of Justice, it clearly goes on to say just mere possession of the nuclear weapons cannot be used as one of the opportunities as a tool for raising the aggression. So Russia cannot take it up. Another thing is Russia says that Ukraine is becoming part of NATO. This is once again the legitimate right of Ukraine. Why? Because as part of self-defense, they would also be able to join any of the collective defensive schemes as well. NATO happens to be a uniform program created where number of countries come together. They want to protect each other. So in the present situation, if Ukraine on its own, for its own political affairs, for its own protection of the country, if it plans to go ahead with NATO, then no power can stop it, and Russia cannot say that this is self-defense, says this article. The article further makes a reference to the Caroline test. What is this Caroline test? This is basically about preemptive self-defense. What does this mean? If a particular country suddenly realizes that there is an instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation, in such a case, it can also make use of preemptive self-defense. So the attack has not happened, but in an apprehension that an attack may happen, a country can also make use of self-defense before the attack happens. In self-defense, what happens? The attack has already occurred, but in this particular notion of Caroline test, if all these criteria are met, then even before the attack happens, they can take up this particular issue and also protect themselves. These are some of the principles given in this article. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.